a delay because we had 150 people who registered for this event, but many of them are in the plenary, and there's a delay getting from there to here. So we've asked the panelists to go for some tea, and then as soon as we get our participants, we'll resume. So there'll be a little bit of a delay. We apologize.
Check, Ilyas.
Excellences, Messieurs les ministres, Monsieur Foriata, merci d'être venus. Vous avez à faire. Avant que vous ne commenciez, que l'Afrique continue d'être une destination incontournable. Je pense que nous devrions applaudir pour tout ce que vous avez fait. Je pense que tout pays qui a un ministre des Finances comme lui saura à quel point c'est très difficile de réunir sur 8 milliards de
Good. Mr. Jonathan Yako Okran, the Commissioner for Rural Economy of the African Union. I know that the Commissioner herself could not be here, so we are happy that you're representing her at this important event. To Ms. Rahel Beheni, the Managing Director of Production and Industry, I think this is a little bit what we're doing. This is the transformation. All the sort of cutting-edge work and things that you're doing tell us that precisely when we write this book, it's not just about writing them, it's about doing it, and we will hear from you the amazing things that you're doing, and thank you for coming. Thank you very much for being here with us. And of course, you're the woman. So you're the woman and you're the one who's doing the stuff. So we're very happy to have you here and proud of our association with you. Excellencies, representatives of the diplomatic corps, private sector, and civil society, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to the side event where we cast our focus on one of the most crucial issues in Africa's development agenda, which is transforming Africa's agriculture into an agriculture that produces value, that increases in productivity, and that can actually feed the continent. It is an honor and a pleasure for ECA to be joining forces for this event with the Africa Center for Economic Transformation, ACET. Today, renowned worldwide. I think when you go to China, when you go to the US, when you go to Germany, everybody talks about ACET. Continuing to put Africa on the continent and on the map as also a thinking agency that can provide some thought for and solutions for Africa's problems by Africans themselves. So you are continuing the ECA tradition. So you started it here, and we're very happy to see that it continues long after you have left the ECA. But even more proud and honored that you associate us with this. I want to take this opportunity to encourage everybody to read the report. I started reading it last night. I didn't finish it, but it's a very, very interesting report because it puts in all the nuances and gives us a good sense of sort of the opportunity that exists in the agriculture sector if one really wanted to tap into it. So we know since the turn of the century that Africa has been one of the fastest growing regions in the world. The average annual economic growth rates have been about 5%. The size of our middle class continues to increase. However, despite all this progress, inter-Africa trade has remained low and less diversified. Our expanding continental basket of food is mostly imported. We are importing a lot more food than we are producing and consuming amongst ourselves. And at the same time, even those who work in the area of food production remain poor. Our poverty reduction rates have not been as impressive. Rural poverty still remains, and we have almost 1 out of every 2 people that lives below the $2 a day mark, with 244 million people on the continent still chronically food insecure. The simple reason is that Africa has not yet been able to benefit from all the new technology and the agriculture transformation processes that exist. It's actually quite sad when you look at agriculture statistics. and you see that Africa is still the continent that uses, as the report shows us very clearly, is the less technology intense. We use the lowest amount of fertilizer, and I think that our friends from OCP will tell us about all the new technology and the new possibilities that exist. The ways that we continue to produce our food crops is not optimal. The kinds of food crops we produce, we still do agriculture almost in a sentimental way. We produce cashews because our great-grandfathers produced cashews without understanding whether the soil is still adapt for that. So I think that what we are saying here is that the time is now to change all those processes. The time is now to talking about those dismal statistics on how little agricultural intensification is. And I think what is important is that we have now settled the discussion of large scale versus small scale, smallholder versus large holder. Those emotional debates we can settle because we have analytical work that tells us, where we need to look. And this is, I think, really the value of this report, because it adds to that body of literature that gives us, I think, scientific indications of where we should go. Not only do we need to increase our productivity, but we have more mouths to feed. So whether or not we like it, we are producing more people. It is projected that Africa alone will contribute 54% of the 2.37 billion expected to increase in the world population by 2050. By 2100, Africa will contribute 82% of the total projected population growth. That is 3.2 billion of the 3.8 billion increase will be coming from Africa. So basically, we have that imperative. We have two choices. We're either going to be able to produce well, produce efficiently, and produce enough, or we're going to have to import. We cannot afford to import that much. If we import that much, we will never be able to supply energy, roads, health, or education, because all of our budget will be going to food imports. So the imperative of understanding how to improve Africa's agriculture transformation, how to power Africa's economy through agriculture, comes from all sides. It comes from the human security side of feeding. It comes from the budget side, because Minister Oforiatta doesn't want to go to the markets to raise money just to buy food from Asia or some other place. So I think that we see all that coming. And we also know that when kids are malnourished from 0 to 2 years old, we've lost their brain capacity. And I think this is a part of the whole agricultural conversation that we don't talk about a lot. If kids are not well fed between 0 and 2, it doesn't matter how much you teach them, they will never be as smart as they could have been. So even from that basic human right for our kids, this is an important issue, and I think that this is why we are having this event here today. So finally, just from history, we know that no country in the world has ever been able to industrialize or transform without going through the agriculture sector. So again, agriculture comes in the middle of those discussions, and hence the importance of looking at it. And then finally, the role of the private sector. The private sector, agriculture has always been a private sector activity. It's just that we have not looked at it in those terms. And so we've looked at it more from a social policy. It used to be that we were helping the rural poor with subsidies from the ministers of finance. So it was a social safety net. I think, again, increasingly, the report shows, and the fact that we have business people on the stage shows us that agriculture is the quintessential business sector of the continent, and we need to treat it as such. We run after the mineral sector, we run after some of the industrial sectors, we run after the cotton and the textiles, but it is agriculture that is going to be the basis for powering our economies. And I think, again, that is part of what the report shows us. And we're very happy because what the report is doing is it's comforting some of the work that, of course, has been done during your time at ECA, and you have continued to push it, maybe because of your frustration with the agriculture business not going as far as it needs to go. But agriculture is important for effecting this transformation. One, because it helps also with macroeconomic stability. We saw in 2008, when food prices were blowing, across the world, in Philippines, like in Cameroon, riots on the streets because of food prices and the fact that people could not afford basic food consumption. So it's an important aspect of even the macro and the political stability. We know that it helps transformation. We know that it helps particularly small and medium enterprises, particularly run by women. I tell stories of, a small packaging factory in Ivory Coast that was actually doing bottling of juices for kids, which now has become a big industry because small and medium enterprise business women are buying the packaging to package dried mangoes and dried cashews, and it has exploded as a business. So again, we know that it's clearly a way of growing our economies, empowering our women. It is another way, of course, of creating non-agriculture jobs, because as agriculture begins to take off, again, I go back to this case of Ivory Coast and the packaging. So now there is people that are fixing the machines when they break down. So there is a whole SME sector of industrial machinery that is happening, because it's people who want to package small packs of mangoes and the ones who want to package slightly larger sizes of coffee. And so people are looking at different sizes. And so we're creating new engineers tailored to the kinds of things that you need in Ivory Coast. And the Minister of Agriculture, when we went to visit this project, was saying, they've created 2,000 ancillary jobs out of the agriculture sector. These were people who were on the farm who have now moved over to doing associated services for the agriculture sector. We were not talking about the transportation and the storage. So it is, I think, a particularly important part of our economy. CFTA is the theme of our weekend and our week coming tomorrow. So we cannot talk about agriculture without trade. We know that again, 2008 food crisis, there was a lot of maize in Malawi and there was no maize in Ivory Coast. And we had to bring maize and look for fertilizers from Ukraine because we can't trade across the continent. So again, I think that the CFTA, if we could begin to trade across the continent, in Senegal, we have companies that are doing poultry that bring maize from Brazil because the cost of bringing maize from Malawi to Senegal is just too expensive. So this is the point of the CFTA, and this is where the CFTA meets agriculture transformation, is really opening borders, saying how can we trade with each other? How can we ensure that when there is a surplus in country A, country B can get it without paying all the different logistics, taxes, direct and indirect taxes, so that the goods go forward. So again, we are here to say that with the CFTA, if we can trade these goods amongst ourselves, one, it will probably be cheaper for Ken's budget, it will give him revenues, it will reduce his subsidies, and it will grow the business and create jobs. So I think this is a little bit the link that we're trying to put between the CFTA and the real sectors of our economy. So I think hopefully with that little introduction, I've been able to show how this report really sits at the center of everything we do in this building, how it's important for the discussion we're having this weekend. It's important, I think, for to support the fact that our leaders came together and said, we believe that we need to open our borders, trade better together, trade well together. And it's giving us some indication of what we need to do, how we need to do it, and we hope that we can continue to work with you as we sort of work on the implementation. And we have ministers like Minister Oforiata that can at least begin to serve as the experimental ground for some of the recommendations that are in the report. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and thank you again for honoring us with launching the report at the ECA. Thank you. Now, I have to now introduce you, but I don't know if you need an introduction. It says on my notes that I should introduce you. So, but you're the founder and president of the African Center for Economic Transformation. Of course, our former executive secretary, somebody who transformed the ECA, is known to all the high levels of the government of Ethiopia, past and present. You began your career in the World Bank, became a director, then came to the ECA to serve as the executive secretary of the Economic Commission, in which you, during that period, I think that when we go across the continent, of course, all the heads of states and leaders talk about you. You worked very closely with, I think, one of the well-known leaders of the United Nations, Mr. Boutros Ghali. I think somebody that most of us hold as well very dear to our hearts. And you couldn't stop thinking, so you left all of this and you went and you created assets, so you continue thinking and thinking for the continent. So thank you again very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Dr. K.Y. Amwako, President of Assets.
Thank you very much, Vera. Let me start off by thanking you so much for your very warm welcome and for your eloquent introduction of our report. I really don't need to say anything more about the report, actually, in that sense. And then I also want to thank my finance minister, my brother and friend, Ken, for flying in last night. Across the world, and for your energy and your commitment and contribution. I'll say a few words about Vera in a minute, but I think today is Mother's Day. Yeah. So let me wish all the mothers here happy Mother's Day. And the woman executive, the first woman executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. That is fantastic. So it brings so many memories. This conference center was opened in 1995, the same year I came in. And we did a lot of stuff, and I'm glad the way it looks in terms of being maintained is fantastic. And one of the first major events we did was in 1998, when we had the 40th anniversary of ECA. And I decided to honor African women. So the theme of the conference was Africa's women's contribution to economic development. And we had 1,000 people for 4 days. Some heads of states, the UN Secretary General. And I recall we had banners all across the place saying, "Paradise is open at the command of mothers." Okay?
We should have it every day, continuously.
And, for me, it was a 4-day conference. At the end of the 4 days, the 5th day, I learned that my mother had passed away the last day of the conference. And I didn't know that. So that memory always comes back. And to come back later today and have Vera, the first woman executive secretary of the EC, next to me, my mother must be smiling up there. So I want to thank you very much for the warm welcome. And, when I met Vera in Washington, both of us have had careers in the World Bank, and she also later in the IFC. But I didn't know Vera. I think I left the bank before she came, I believe. So we never overlapped. And I never met her. I knew of her until she was appointed to this job. So I didn't have anything to do with the appointment, I can assure you. And then I had a couple of meetings with her, and immediately I said to myself, she will do good for ECA, and she will do good for Africa. Amen. So I wish you all the best, and you have our support. It's an important position. It's not an easy institution, but you have what it takes, the smarts, the energy, and the toughness to take this organization forward. So thank you very much, and thanks for your very nice welcome. I'm not going to say much more about this report in terms of the content of the report. You said everything. But let me give you a sense of why I studied this institution, asset, and some of the work we do, and looking forward, areas where I think we can even work closely with ECA. And I said, this is the second time I've been here, this time for us to present this report. When I was here and I was leaving, no, even before, 1997 or 98, we did the economic report on Africa. And in that report, I did a foreword to that report, and I said the next journey for Africa has to be on economic transformation, or structural transformation. We've been through poverty reduction, we've been through structural ideas, we've been through all that, good governance and all those themes, but economic transformation is where we have to go. And we try to discern the structural transformation agenda. So when I left here, I created this center to focus specifically on that. And our first report really tried to define what economic transformation is all about. A lot of effort, a lot of thought, a lot of consultation went into it. We came out with the concept that with growth is not enough. because African countries were growing. When commodities prices go up, our GDP goes up and we are happy. And when the commodities prices go down, and then things go back to stagnation and challenges and all that. So transformation means more than growth. It has to be growth that leads to diversification with export competitiveness, productivity across all sectors, technology upgrading, and all that leads to human well-being. So we came out, transformation means growth with depth. And that's what we've been projecting, working with. And the Ghana government has been extremely supportive. And since Minister Oforiatta came in, many of the things we bring in African finance ministers and others around the Compact with Africa, and that's an area that Vera and I have been talking about. The role of the private sector is very key, and I'm very glad that we created a division focused on the private sector development, because I think it's central to go forward. So we hope to work on all these issues with you going forward. As far as this report is concerned, Julius, my colleague here, will be making the introduction. The report takes the view, and as Bear has so eloquently described, that it's at the center of economic transformation. If you transform agriculture, the implications for the rest of the economy, for diversification, for food security, gender equality, the whole range, jobs, is all at the center of transformation. And I think that's what this report tries to indicate. And at Asset, we believe in preparing reports and also getting policymakers and others to act on it. So we call ourselves a think and do tank. We are not just a think tank. We produce a lot, but what happens? So there are so many mechanisms we've put in place to follow through our reports. And in June, we'll be having the African Transformation Forum in Accra, where we'll be taking some of these issues with policymakers to see that they translate some of these things into action. So with those brief remarks, I want to thank all of you for coming. And thanks very much, Vera, for hosting us today. And all the other panelists who are here, I look forward to your interventions, and thanks for spending the time with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to the Honorable Minister, Minister of Finance of Ghana, Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. You have the floor.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much indeed. I think we've had, honestly, enough conversation here, and then we need to get on with the work. But essentially, I mean, for us, maybe using Ghana as a template, it was quite clear to the government that sort of subjugating agriculture to the backwaters was not what was going to help. So we started in government thinking through what we call the Planting for Food and Jobs program. And the intent was to move ourselves away from the center and urban areas and begin to get, the economics of the rural sector back in focus, and to decentralize how we plan the economy. So there was a commitment to fund $1 million or so per each constituency, and through the Planting for Foods and Jobs program, begin to reactivate the whole issue of the basic of industrialization, and leave it in the hands of the rural folks. We also are importing about $2.3 billion worth of food for a country of water, sun, rain, name it. And that really is unconscionable, and that's pressure on our foreign exchange reserves. So not only will it lead to the issue of food security, as Vera also mentioned, the whole human capacity problem is key for us, and therefore when you look at the nutrition elements, you begin to find a challenge if we have to import to make sure that kids in kindergarten whom we feed once a day do not get the type of quality of food that is required. And as you know, 90% really of the work that is done in agriculture is also by women. And so for us in Ghana, putting resources in a planting for food and jobs is really sort of going to underpin the whole diversification industrialization program, and that's sort of the commitment we have. So what ASSET is doing is key for us to be more scientific about the way in which we approach it, and combine both the 1 acre, 1 bull concept with really sort of the more of the plantation issue, and finding out how we can bring the type of technical support that we have. And I think it's we have done it well in cocoa with regards to the smallholder farmer having quality cocoa for us to have the best cocoa in the world, and that is supported, by extension services that has really been done well by Cocoa Board. And you ask ourselves, why have we not replicated, that same formula, so that there'll be a lot more diversification for the rural folk. The other challenge too that we have had is in looking at cocoa, for example, in which we, the middle class or the elite in Accra, have helped the farmer to produce, but we have not helped ourselves with regard to the value chain. The cocoa seeds represent about $6 billion. The value chain of cocoa is about $100 billion. And somehow the educated elite have not found a way to participate in the value chain, so that we are not subject to only the world cocoa price, but we could then, in actuality, pay more than the world cocoa price to the average farmer. And I think that's a guilt that we share, and we are now working with Cote d'Ivoire, so that with 70% of cocoa products between the two countries, there's no reason why we should be price takers. So I think we in this room need to take a lot more responsibility as to how to leverage of what the hard work of our farmers are doing. And it is this type of deep research that should motivate us and give us sort of the critical path to do what we have to do. So thank you for this, and I'm truly excited about this opportunity, and how, as finance ministers, we will work with the ministries of Agric and the think tanks to make sure that we get as much leverage from agriculture as we should get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and we will be there beside you to create this commodity exchange that we so desperately need. Thank you again. I think now we pass it on to Mr. Kariuki for the presentation of the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to be quick about it, so I might not cover every detail, but I'm going to highlight what has come out of this report. It's a fairly dense report, and I would encourage you to read it, and I think we'll distribute the copies. We'll distribute some copies, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, I'll go. So in terms of how does ASSET see what is the vision for agriculture? It's basically about enhancing food security. That is quite important. We're also about supporting farmers to have a middle-class lifestyle, really. How do we improve farmers from being these poor people that we want to help to actually people who are actually able to have a decent living standard from that farming? How do we boost productivity at that level? And the other thing then is how does it support transformation? So maybe you may not be able to read some of that text, but hopefully. Well, it's really about how do we modernize agriculture, as I've said in the first place, at the farm level. And then the next thing is how do you then connect agriculture to the other sectors? You have the input sectors and you have the other sectors downstream, because then that's how you create jobs. But I think Executive Secretary has actually led some of these quite well, because really when you do it properly, you don't only improve incomes, but then you also stimulate other sectors. You have input sectors can create many jobs, and more importantly, you have the downstream, processing, logistics, marketing, branding, retailing, and actually sometimes that is where you really make the money. Sometimes you find that it's people who do the branding. For example, we have just been told about cocoa. When we did one of our studies, the people who do the branding, like Kraft, who don't actually make chocolate, they actually get coveted chocolate, and all they do is branding. Marketing, branding, and they probably capture 40% of the value in branding. So it tells you that value chain is a very, very important to think. How do you think of the value chain as such, and how do you create jobs in the process? And this is what I'm going to kind of elaborate a bit. So in terms of economy, we know that it is important. GDP kind of tracks agricultural GDP. Unemployment is also important. Although of late, obviously, other sectors have become important, but still agriculture is about 25% of Africa GDP. And well, maybe quite, in terms of employment, much more. Some rising up to 70 in some countries. So it's an important employer, but obviously as we transform, it becomes less of an important employer because we are going to move people to other sectors. That's why it becomes important. How do you create the jobs for those people? And therefore, two tracks in terms of how do we think about Africa industrialization. I think we have seen the traditional way of manufacturing, export-intensive manufacturing, but more so, the more important way is how do you, as we have mentioned, how do you make agro-processing the pathway for industrialization? Because you can do a lot of processing and also other things that we have talked, agribusiness and so on. So that's the other part of industrialization, rather as opposed to the traditional labor export, labor-intensive export, therefore. So that's the same thing I've just talked about. This was actually quite well captured in the speech by the executive secretaries. How does agriculture contribute to transformation? We create production. When you do production, you can actually lower the cost of food. And for a lot of, if you look at the budgets of household budgets, sometimes 70% of the cost of a household budget can actually be food. But if you increase productivity, it means that they can spend less on food. And if they can spend less on food, it means they can spend more on other things, which means that you can stimulate demand in other things. If you have high productivity, then it means that you can support agro-processing, because the key thing in agro-processing is the raw material. It has to be cheap, it has to be high quality, it has to be consistent. And you can only do this through a modernized agricultural farm production system. And therefore, you can also increase government revenue, because then you can reduce imports. We know 60 billion or so that we import is basically fiscal space that you lose. So if you can actually capture that, if you can make your system, the agriculture, be able to address some of that, then it means that you have more fiscal space, more demand for other things. So there are quite a number of things, and I think that picture captures that, and it was explained. So I don't want to go much beyond that. So in terms of, just I think this I've jumped. Yes, land we know is one of the bigger challenges of agriculture. And this is one we'll find, because we know about 90% of Africa is customary land. How do you deal with that? Because that's a big challenge. So what we looked at, there are interesting things that we found that you can do with that. Because we need to secure land rights. We need to ease access to land. And we also need to find a way to protect, but as we commercialize and we let people to come and invest, we need to be careful. How do you make sure you don't dispossess people? Because I think that's one challenge. So you want investment, but how do you protect rights? And therefore, so we went ahead and found some interesting things that are happening that can help. For example, one example that I saw is Uganda, which has implemented what you call a land information system. And by being able to create an information system that can help in registering and so on, they have been able to cut, I think, land registration from 227 days to about 27 days. And this actually translates into different things. Mortgages processing has come down from 50 to about 5 days. And at the same time, government revenues have increased from $8 million, I think, to about $100 million. So in a way, you get all kinds of benefits by just making things work. The farmer benefits, everybody benefits. So it's important to start thinking of how to improve land, because this is one of the key constraints that we found. The other thing, how boosting productivity then, as we said, this is at the heart of it. Because before you do anything, you have to have a productive, you have to have higher yields. And therefore, there are many things we can do about that, and I'll discuss this a bit more. The first thing, obviously, you have to have what you call a package of green revolution. You know, it happened in Asia, it may not happen in Africa, but there are also interesting examples that have been done, showing it can be done. For example, if we give the example of, I think, Kopong irrigation scheme in Ghana, with fertilizers, irrigation, support, they have been able to do about 4.5 tons, metric tons per hectare, which is actually what you do in Asia. And also, I think, also in rain-fed, I think, agriculture, you also have seen interesting examples in Tanzania, in Uganda, again, using farmer-to-farmer field support system, combined with a package of fertilizer, extension, and so on. Therefore, it is possible to do it. But again, in Africa, the things matter a lot, so you really have to be context-specific what you're supporting. And we'll be discussing that as we go along. One interesting thing that we found as we go along is really, and I think it was mentioned, machines. Africa, we are still with the hoe, which really you cannot say you're going to develop a modern agriculture system using a hoe. If you give an example, how many tractors per Africa is about 10 tractors per 100 hectares. If you think of India, it's about 120, I think, something like 10 times more. But mechanization doesn't just mean tractors. Obviously, you have to think what is the appropriate way of doing it. And more importantly, what are the various business models? Because it's really about a business model. You cannot tell a poor farmer you're going to buy a tractor. Maybe they can't, and you have small plots. But there are ways of doing it. Obviously, you have mechanization services. That is happening. And this is an interesting case because if you look at even some of studies, you think in Ghana or not other places, you find medium-scale farmers can actually be very important because they are the ones who can afford tractors, but they can also provide services because if I have a tractor, I don't have to use it always. I can also be providing services. Farmer organizations, and I think I have seen this in Uganda, Kafoka, having tractors and hiring to their members. Also interesting enough is local fabricators, and I think this was mentioned. You can also make other simple equipment that can help. And you don't really need to have the big tractors. You can have what you call two-wheel tractors. I don't know whether somebody has, there's something called the iron buffalo in Thailand. And this was a very, very interesting evolution because they started with something that was like you push and you have some, initially it was a buffalo actually that was pulling. Then with innovation with the local fabricator, they put an engine on it and some wheel, and then you pull they put it. And then over time, it has kind of put a seat and other things. So it has developed to a two-wheel tractor. But again, this has shown a way of looking and working with local fabricators to actually develop local machines that are appropriate. So that sector is also very, very important. And as was mentioned, we need to think, how do you support the local, and it creates jobs, but it also helps the farming sector. So that becomes ways of providing machinery. So we think this is an important thing to think, how do you mechanize agriculture? Because without that, you really can't move fast. Then commercializing agriculture is the other thing, because then the fact that farmers have to be commercially oriented. They have to be different, not subsistence. Because we do have many farmers who are subsistence. They produce for food, and then they sell what is surplus. And that actually affects even what you produce, because if you're producing for food, then you may want to produce what you like eating, but that's not what the industry wants. For example, if you think of cassava, the industry may care about starch in cassava, but when people eat, they don't want high cassava with high starch. So you find that you can't get the quality you want. So unless you have farmers who now start producing in a different way, in a more focused way, in a more commercialized way, understanding what the market is. So you have to find a way to commercialize, to give that orientation. And that also requires quite a number of things, because when you think of farmers also, it's about risk perception. Subsistence farmers, because they are also poor people, they're also very risk averse, so they may not be able to take invest in interesting new hybrids in what the market wants. So they want to care about food first, then they produce later. But if you can make food markets work, they want to be sure that even if I produce for commercial agriculture and I go to the food market, I can actually be able to buy my food. As we said, 2000 crisis, we saw what happened. So people are always worried about markets. So markets have to work, all of them, because so that then if I decide to devote myself to specialize, I can also know that I don't have to worry about buying food because the markets are stable and working. So that's an important. So how you commercialize that? And again, it's about making the whole system work, because commercializing is just about farming. It's having the right ecosystem, because we talk of smallholder farmers, but other farmers are also important. There is a middle class, medium scale farmers. There is a large scale farmers. And sometimes we think they're in competition, but actually they can work together and be symbiotic. And I think I can give one example that I think is developing in Kenya. If you look at the dairy industry, you find that there are the large scale farmers who actually do the breeding, very high technology. They can bring very, very frontier technologies down. And then you find the medium scale farmers who are more like raising the cattle, the cows, and you find the smallholder farmers are actually now focusing on producing the milk. They actually don't even try to raise the calf. They actually sell it because they just want, this is my specialization. So you find that kind of a symbiotic relationship is developing, because they get the hybrid cow from the medium scale farmer. The medium scale farmers get the semen or from the very high end large scale farmers who can import all this. So it's a question of creating that ecosystem that has all of them working together in a certain way and supporting each other, rather than the traditional discourse has been we are kind of pitting, one is against the other. But yes, they can work together. And even when you talk of contract farming, it is medium scale farmers who can contract smallholder farmers. So this is important. Feeding Africa is also something that we have looked at. These are actually key. So we did look at a number of staples that are key, that produce calories, and try to think what is needed to feed Africa. And yes, if you think of it, it matters. Infrastructure and quality are one of the two most important things that we found. If you found that if you don't have infrastructure, actually, it's cheaper sometimes to bring food over the sea than food over land, from one part of the country to the other. And therefore, it matters how you build infrastructure, that you can create markets. And also, there's something also we found interesting called, we can call it natural markets in terms of, for example, if you think of Tanzania, the natural market for some parts of southern Tanzania highlands is really Zambia. If you think of the northern part of Tanzania, it's really Kenya. So you started thinking of these kind of natural markets and how you can support them. And even as the slower integration goes on, you can find ways to start developing these kind of small natural markets. And there's also other thing that we also found important, which I raised here, is the first mile transport is a very, very important thing. If you look at the infrastructure, the transport, from the farm gate to the next stop, that is the highest cost that farmers incur. They are smallholder farmers, so the quantity is not a lot, so you can't, the quantity is not enough to invest. But there are also interesting examples. For example, you have, like in Ghana, I think they have introduced what you call the three-wheel kind of tricycles, which you find where they have been introduced, farmers have, post-harvest losses have gone down, costs have gone down, people farm on good time, and so on. So those are the interesting innovations as you think of how to make the markets work. Agriculture powering industry, yes, this is, as we say, agro-processing can be the way to move forward. But what does this mean? How do you support the whole value chain? There are two ways. As we said, there is the upstream inputs and so on, which is also an important way. And I think OCP is here, can tell you it's a big industry for inputs and so on, for fabrication, for other things. But also downstream is also many, many things that can be done. Post-harvest losses, processing itself, retailing, and so on. Therefore, we need to think of how do you go about it? Because there are many value chains, so you need to think of how do you prioritize value chains, which value chains do you prioritize, and how do you support? And also, as I go, there's something that I found very interesting, because you may want to go to agro-industrial processing, but you'll have to move slowly as you move to cottage industry and other things and supporting it. And one example that I found interesting, actually, in Ghana, is where one SME processor was processing Garian and exporting it and other things. But after some time, he realized, maybe I don't need to do all this, because he has to go and look for cassava, transport it, process it. He realized there were some women who were in northern Ghana who had a cassava processing, and they were actually producing the same. So he was able to work with them in a kind of hybrid processing, so where they process a product in bulk, and they supply him, and he does the packaging, the branding, and so on, and the export. So in a way, the processing was parceled in a kind of a hybrid system that involved artisanal processing and modern processing. So this kind of things, that is where you start thinking carefully, because then they're also quite gender sensitive. Because then you can have artisanal processors who can now be supported in terms of quality and so on to produce a bulk product, where they then become kind of contract manufacturers. So these are interesting things that you can start thinking about. So the whole idea is that agriculture and industrial development are two sides of the same coin, and actually they have to be think carefully. That's the whole idea that we are saying. Industry and agriculture, the same thing. They have to be thought in the same way, and close collaboration between ministers of the industry, ministers of agriculture, finance, and trade. All of them need to work together to support this. This, I think, was also, I don't have to dwell so much on this. This has been repeated, I think, quite often. We have said, there are many opportunities that can be provided, jobs, chemical irrigation, manufacturing, packaging materials. If you think of seed production, all those are interesting jobs applying the farm system. So these are way of, but what does it mean? It means that you need to develop skills. You need to think of your TVL policy, because all this requires skills. So skills becomes also an important part of this equation, so that you can take all these form employment opportunities that are there as you upgrade the value chains. We said, and I think I've emphasized this, that the whole idea is that medium scale might be the most important sector, because it's kind of the glue. As I said, it's a kind of the glue that creates this ecosystem that I've mentioned. And this is what is called, we say, is maybe the missing middle in African farming. We don't have that. We basically have some few large scale and many medium scale, small scale smallholder farmers. So how do you start filling this missing middle? And one way is really to think, how can you make the youth become these medium scale farmers? How do you provide them support? Because they can get into that industry. Because this is the industry, this is the sector that can provide them the more attractive farming opportunities that they may want to care. They don't want to do tilling for sure. They cannot do the higher end, but they can do this. So you can provide support in different ways. And there are many ways, obviously. You can create agricultural industrial parks that can provide support. And I'll talk about this later, but interesting thing, and I think this was raised, I think some recent study, is that a lot of people who you call in the middle class, in the cities, have actually acquired quite a bit of land. So most of the land is actually, I think, almost 50% of land now, I think in Zambia or something, even in Ghana, even in Kenya, is being acquired by people who are in the cities, and who sometimes you call telephone farmers, because they try to farm by telephone. They call their neighbor or somebody with disastrous results, obviously. One friend of mine had a problem where one day they ran out of how to cheat him, until one day they told him the crocodile ate the cow. So that's when he stopped farming, because he realized, because this is how you do. But then these people who were calling young people can actually work with these people as subcontractors. Because if I'm in the city and I have a farm and I'm trying to run it, it's hard. But you can be able to create such a way that they provide farming services. They can be said, we can provide a kind of a way where they can provide if today I want plowed, it can be plowed. If I want weed to be done, it can be done. And this becomes services that we provide. And one example, I think, in Nigeria already, you have what you're calling weed killers. So they have got these young people, they put them in nice uniforms, they equip them with knapsack and sprayers and so on, and provide them training. And if you want weeds killed, you just order them to your farm, and they come and they kill all the weeds. So it's possible to develop interesting models for this without necessarily them having to become farmers. They can actually start providing farming services. So gender is obviously important. And the interesting thing, as you upgrade farming, sometimes you might actually create gender imbalances. Because when you're upgrading, it means that you are looking for investment, isn't it? People to invest. And who has the investments to do? Then you have challenges. So how do you, and obviously customer, we have also issues of customer laws, inheritance. It's not always that the women inherit, but you can start changing those laws, I think. Rwanda has changed those laws. I think also in Niger, I saw something interesting example in Niger where parents were inheriting their daughters before they died, and that one made it possible for them to retain that land even after. Also, I saw I think, in Senegal where women groups have created advocacy, and they deal with traditional authorities, and they start getting them to listen to them and change how they allocate land. So there are ways of doing that. An interesting thing, also from our studies, you may find that upgrading value chain, and I give an interesting example again I've seen in Ghana, when women tend to create not only farm, but they also tend to be the ones who create interesting, all these artisanal food processing are basically women business, and they are set up by women. But as the markets develop, what happens? People come in and start investing, but who benefits from that? And I give one interesting example. If you go in Ghana, there's something called Cocoa King. They sell porridge on the street. They have now people in uniform. They have a kind of formalized that sector. But now, this was before being sold by women, but the person who is owning Cocoa King is a man. And the same thing with Gari. It was initially women business, but as it grew and the market developed, investors came in. So it's actually important to think of how do you create, as you upgrade value chains, how do you protect, how do you provide, make sure that it doesn't actually remove people who actually created certain industries there. So upgrading can, without being care, can actually be gender insensitive. So finance, as we say here, is important. Also, cheap inputs, bundled inputs. How do you access, provide women with proper inputs? And I think we have seen examples where if you have to provide some inputs that are bundled, finance together with fertilizer, together with, even when you carry seeds, and I think I saw that again in an example where they had to put the package in a way that can actually be handled by women because they have to carry it when they are coming from farm. So putting things in certain packaging also helps. Inputs in certain packaging in a way that is gender friendly. And also another example I give is also machines. You have to think machines are not usually gender friendly. And if I was to give an example, Gari is a women business, but if you look at the machines for Gari, they are made for men. So if you look at, even if you have women who are doing processing, they have to employ men because basically the machines. Yet you can create machines that are hydraulic, that don't need men to operate, because the other ones are just require a lot of strength. So it's a question of how do you create even gender-friendly things, thinking of in terms of as you upgrade value chain, as you create all these machines for processing, as you create packages for inputs and so on, you have to think of it in a gender-friendly way. And now my last slide is about all this obviously has to be done in an environmentally sustainable way. We know environment is important. We know climate change has become important. So how do you make sure that we don't intensify, but at the same time cause environmental destruction? You have seen challenges with fertilizer use in, I think, India and other places where water tables have had even irrigation. You can read with siltation and so on. So you have to think carefully, how do you do this in a sustainable way? So that is an issue. So more friendly irrigation system, probably more drip irrigation as opposed to the other kind of irrigations. And if you also think of things like conservation agriculture, which are also quite, which you don't disturb the soil too much. And I think I think even the transformation in Cerrado in Brazil was based on a lot of conservation agriculture. So you can actually do it quite well, where you don't really, no tillage agriculture, some of the examples. So the whole idea is that you also need to really think of climate smart agriculture and work with extension officers to introduce all these. So to close. So we're saying agricultural transformation must harness agriculture and industrial policies to drive overall economic transformation. This is an opportunity that many countries are fortunate to have, and it's time that they reached out and seized it with enthusiasm. So Africa development and all partners, development partners, need to support Africa governments in all this. I think basically that's what we are saying. We need to do the transformation. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kariuki, for that very comprehensive presentation, which reflects the document. I'll make a small ad here. When you go to Togo, there is a guy who has produced a machine called Fufu Mix, since we're with Ghanaians and everybody. And it basically is a machine that helps to cook fufu in a very easy way. And over the last 2 or 3 years, he's become a millionaire just producing this fufu mix machine. So Google it and see. But it's quite exciting in terms of very easy technology, which saves time and money, and I like the name. So without further ado, we will pass on the floor now to, maybe we start with Ms. Rachel. We tend to come to the private sector last, but you've heard all these potential things that can be done. Why don't you give us a little bit of the experience and vary a little bit the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I have to say thank you for being here, because I strongly believe it is a private sector that is driving when it's commercialization or advancing technology or everything, because we are the one who's facing the real problem. And we should be the one to own this, and I'm really happy to have this floor. Coming back, you just said it about fufu, and I have to say about injera. Because you know what I really learned is, just like you said, I'm sure fufu has been eaten for 1,000 years, the same like injera. And what have we done for injera? When we think about how we advance injera, the only thing I think we have done is maybe adding some electrical power to the oven that we used to bake injera. But how many years we've been eating injera? So nothing has been done. So to that extent, in order to advance such business, like all over Africa, our food, we have such great food that we can commercialize and we can introduce to the world, but which we haven't done because it has been done only through the local or home scale production. And because of that, we don't care about quality. We don't care about capacity so far. But now time is changing. Why it is changing? We talk about industrialization and we talk about women advancement. So now women, instead of staying at home and bake, today they are part of the industrialization. So with this, the need is coming for food production to upscale. And by upscaling, meaning we have to come with automation. In fact, that is currently what with Ethio Green, that is what we are in the process of automating the injera processing. By doing that, we believe that we can reach more household. And the contribution we can make is not just limited to the business, but it has a social impact. Because especially as most of the food production or food processing in Ethiopia across Africa is done by women. And then it is a very hard chore for a woman to do it at home. So coming back to Ethio Green, I started this business, of course, in the US. And starting it in the US, of course, it is out of necessity. And coming back, when I sit from here, now also it is becoming a necessity. Why it is a necessity? Population is growing. And with this population, are we ready to sustain the growing population demand? And I think with that comes where the focus is to be on agriculture. And it is timely, and I'm really excited to hear all this thing, which I believe will bring a big change for the food industry process. And, in saying that, also I have to talk about quality. When we talk about quality, what do we mean by quality? If you think, for example, I think the West world, when we think about quality, they want to know exactly what they're eating, why they're eating. But when you think of Africa, we eat for for the sake of eating. Sometimes, we don't know what we eat, or we don't even know why we are eating, honestly, just to feel like ourselves, to feel the hunger. But, it has, again, you even discussed about the nutritional fact for the kids. In order for these kids to grow and to think, for their brain to develop, they have to have a nutritional food they have to consume. But how do we do that? So that's why we need technology, innovation, and we have to think advancing our food production and our food processing. With injera, I can tell you, and the same thing with other African food. Most of the time, especially when we go abroad, it is considered ethnic food. Why it is ethnic food? Because it is sold on the ethnic market. But why? Why not it be in the mainstream market? The number one issue is quality. That quality being, for example, do we have certification, to qualify for that market? No, we don't. So when we process, we have to think also about certification, how we process it, the nutritional fact, all the sustainability. And coming back here, for example, as I said, do we have, for the production and advancement of food, we have, we need to create awareness for the consumer. And awareness by the consumer means they are demanding the producer. I think that is what needs to happen in Africa. By saying the demand or awareness, meaning does the consumer know what they're eating? So that is where we have to go. And then to hear all this about, advancement of farming and so on, it is really keen and it's really very important for our advancement as a business. And also, as I said earlier, our food is crossing border, but it's not crossing culture. I think that is also one of the major things we have to take into consideration.
Thank you very much. I think you have raised some very specific points which only somebody who is in the business and in the market can understand. And I like that question about ethnic foods and the issue of quality. Let me go now to, I think, one of our big and important partners. Actually, if we move forward in the areas of agriculture transformation on the continent, it's because the African Union came together and put the CADEP and reinvigorated the whole question of agriculture and the importance of it in our government plans and the development planning of the continent. So please, I know representing the AU Commissioner who was held up and couldn't be here, Madam Josepha Sako, I will call Mr. Okran to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the kind introduction. I'll be making these remarks on behalf of the Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture, Her Excellency, Madam Josepha Sako. She would have liked very much to be here with us today, but other equally pressing assignments have taken her elsewhere. I'll be speaking on the continental perspectives of this excellent and groundbreaking report which is being launched today, and I will continue with what the AUC is doing in the area of agriculture, trade, and infrastructure. The ASIP report makes the case, in keeping with AU perspectives, that regional integration will, one, create bigger and more efficient markets and increase trade, as well as facilitate the setting up of agro-processing industries across Africa. Two, it will link individual country markets and permit free movement of goods within and across the continent. Three, it will provide much larger markets for industrial output and give a strong impetus for investors seeking to set up agro-industry, fertilizer plants or equipment or machinery for manufacturing. And four, it will also make it possible to connect smallholders who are the dominant force in African agriculture to markets. Now, in order to achieve that though, the well-known constraints that must be tackled include the following. 1, erratic policies on tariffs, prices, exchange rates, and taxes. 2, poor infrastructure, including energy. 3, fragmented and risky markets. 4, difficulties in accessing land and finance. And 5, poorly functioning input markets. And 6, inadequate skills and technology. So what is the AUC doing about all these constraints? The African Union Commission, through the Malabo Declaration on Accelerated Agricultural Growth and Transformation, which was adopted in 2014, is addressing some of these constraints. For example, the heads of states made a commitment to enhance investment finance in agriculture, agribusiness, and agro-industries. Furthermore, another commitment was made for the development of infrastructure for market access for agricultural commodities and inputs. Indeed, the Malabo Declaration is seeking to triple intra-African trade in agricultural commodities and services by 2025. In doing so, it will seek to simplify and formalize current trade practices. The Malabo Declaration emphatically stated that it will seek to fast-track the establishment of Continental Free Trade Area, which has just taken place in Kigali, Rwanda. The African Union is also implementing the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, which is PIDA for short, which is a multi-donor program covering transport, energy, transboundary water and telecommunication, as well as information and communication technology. So to conclude, I will say that the African Union is on track to achieving its goals on trade, agriculture, and infrastructure. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're very grateful for the support from the African Union on these issues. Now let me turn to one of our sister agencies, the FAO, that is at the forefront of this fight. Mr. David Phiri, who is the sub-regional coordinator for Eastern Africa and the representative to the African Union and the ECA, for your brief remarks on the regional dimension.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank you and ASSET for convening the conference. I would also like to commend, I think, the African Center for Economic Transformation for a very comprehensive and informative report on agriculture powering Africa's transformation. And I think it provides to the fore the issues that we need to deal with. Agricultural transformation, of course, is critical for ending hunger and achieving food security and nutrition in Africa. And it is also critical for addressing other pressing issues on the continent, including employment, industrialization, women empowerment, ending protracted crises and conflict, and building resilience to climate change. I think the challenges are nicely all illustrated in the document. The interplay between low productivity, low income, stagnant agricultural production systems have resulted in entrenched hunger. And yet, the sector of agriculture offers the greatest potential for poverty reduction and job creation, particularly among vulnerable rural populations and the urban poor. The World Economic Forum in 2016 claimed that compared to other sectors, this is not FAO, this is the World Economic Forum. It said that compared to other sectors, economic growth driven by the agricultural sector is estimated to be 11 times more effective in reducing poverty than GDP growth per se. And this is probably because a lot of our people, 65%, are involved in agriculture. So clearly, where any monies that come from mining, for example, end up in few hands in agriculture, broad growth actually results in good reduction of poverty. Now, I was also asked a very specific question with respect to a regional approach to food security. How, because this is also something that this report recommends, that I think we need to move to regional. In fact, the answer is quite ambivalent. The reason is very simple. I think heads of state, it must be in the early 2000s, when late President Yadema of Togo asked fellow heads of state and government to put together critical list of foods or crops that Africa must work on. FAO and others, including African Union and ECA, worked together on this together, produced a very brilliant report. But I don't think much was followed up after that, because governments, particularly nation states, want to do everything by themselves in country, regardless of their willingness to move to regional level. And I think, to be on the positive side, perhaps the continental free trade area might do what has not been done in the past to improve regional food security. So we hope that this particular initiative will be more useful than even the regional economic communities that were established, especially in some cases, especially for this for this reason. But I think it's important because then you expect the comparative advantages of different countries. So by default, actually, because of porous borders, there has been some movements of crops and foods, animals from one area to the other, but it has not been designed by the states coming together to work on this as it should have been done. And it is the same thing that will also constrain the value chain approach at that level. But with respect to FAO, and then I'll finish, I would like to say that what we try to do, whether it's Southern Africa, where I was before, and Eastern Africa now, what we try to do to support countries and the regional economic communities, including IGAD here, is to support them with policies. And we try to make sure that those policies are inclusive at both country and regional level, so that those policies are also supportive of private sector development. That's the first thing. The second one is production intensification. And production intensification in such a way that we put the farmer at the center, that farming should be done as a business, not as a way of life, which means that production intensification is also done with market linkages, as well as capacity development, which facilitates regional and international trade. And the third thing that we do is to support both IGAD as well as the countries with resilience building, whether it's through land improvements, pastoral work that we do, provision of water for livestock and people, as well as introduction of drought-tolerant crops and livestock. And above all, we take climate change as a given, and therefore support climate-smart technologies and methodologies, especially conservation agriculture. We hope that this will eventually lead to agricultural transformation in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You ended with the word climate smart. I think somebody that has not only been supporting it, but has clearly comparative advantage in some of the input technology into the agriculture sector is the Office Charifien de Phosphate of Morocco, which is that's one of the reasons why we should create this commodity markets, because we can put them on that market. They are a natural monopoly. 80% of the world's phosphate is found, is it 80% or even more maybe, is found in Morocco. So clearly they are a price setter, and it is on this continent. And that's why sometimes it's quite painful when you hear the statistics about fertilizer use in the world, and we are the lowest when we have all of the natural resources for it on this continent. I think that what OCP has done is go even further than that and add artificial intelligence, new technology. We can even call it, I was thinking about what to call it, is it genetic modification of soil and fertilizer. Very interesting and exciting stuff that's happening on our continent, I think, to really power the agriculture sector. And I really, really hope that we could vulgarize the technology that is coming out of OCP in terms of fertilizer use and agriculture development much, much faster. And now I'm talking to my policymakers to do this. We've all heard about Maroc Vert. We've listened to the transformation that has happened in Morocco under this program. So let me call Mr. Faisal Benamour, a friend and now Senior Vice President for East Asia of the OCP Group, to tell us a little bit more about what they're doing to transform the continent.
Thank you, Dr. Sangwe, for the invitation and all the work done to make all those partners around the table. Thank you also to Dr. Amauka and the extensive report done by Asset, and I'm sure it will help all the stakeholders around African agriculture to find a way to do better. Across much of the continent, poor fertilizer access remain a major agricultural bottleneck, preventing farmers from reaching the yield necessary to move away from traditional subsistence farming. When African farmers do use fertilizer, they pay 2 to 6 times more than the rest of the world. And the report and the asset report go through most of the challenges, starting from access to finance, currency fluctuation, transportation, logistics, and product knowledge. This is why OCP Africa is committed not only to working hand in hand with farmer and local government to teach them best practices, conduct soil testing, recommend fertilizer, connect them with financing, and improve their access to the market, but also to establishing local fertilizer production capacity near major agricultural regions, so that we are able to supply farmers not only with customized fertilizer, but reasonably priced, made locally with local resource and natural sources. And I will go through some success story we had across all the continent, starting from here, from Ethiopia, where we started in 2012 with the ETHIOSIS program, a very extraordinary program launched by ATA with my friend here, Khalid Bomba, and the Ethiopian Ministry of Agriculture, a program that starts, first of all, by developing soil fertility map of the country and define what's the real need of the country in terms of fertilizer. And we have been honored to be part of this effort, joining ATA and the Ministry of Agriculture. And the result of this is not only mapping Ethiopian soil, but developing customized fertilizer formula for Ethiopia. As a result, we started 2 years ago to supply Ethiopian market directly through international competitive bid. and the result was really tremendous. The price of fertilizer goes down. Last campaign it was minus 3,000 per ton for the farmer. The demand and the application goes up plus 55% for the last 2 years of fertilizer application in Ethiopia. And agricultural yield, of course, goes up with plus up to 37% for maize, and I think global agricultural production of Ethiopia goes plus 20% for the last campaign. And now we are implementing the second phase of this partnership, building a $2.4 billion integrated state-of-the-art fertilizer complex in Derdawa, where we will produce fertilizer not only for Ethiopia. Ethiopia will become the first African country self-sufficient in terms of fertilizer, but it will also become a source of hard currency for the country, rather than being the major expense of hard currency for the country. And the basic of that, it was trivial, let's say. Coming to fertilizer, it's a mixture between three basic nutrients. Nitrogen, most of the time coming from natural gas resources, phosphorus coming from phosphate deposit, mining phosphate deposit, and potash coming from potash deposit. In Ethiopia, we used to still import fertilizer, where this land have been blessed by one of the largest discovery of potash and significant discovery of gases. And the only thing they missed was the access of phosphorus, where when Morocco and OCP is the largest player in the P market. So the idea was to put in place and valorize to walk the talk of the Pan-African integration, and to build as two African brothers plant here in Ethiopia, where we will valorize the natural resources coming from the two countries, where we will bring from outside Ethiopia only phosphorus that is missed here. So phosphorus coming from Morocco will meet the natural gases and the potash to build this complex that will be a real showcase for the Pan-African integration. We have also other real success story in Angola, for example, where the price of fertilizer bags went down from $135 to $30 for the last campaign, and thanks for this effort, thanks to the partnership between the Ministry of Agriculture in Ghana, who commit to secure access to hard currency with to local importer, OCP Africa, who supplied all the needed product customized for Angola, and local importer who commit to make available fertilizer at fixed price to the farmer. Same initiative we had in Guinea-Conakry when under the sponsorship of President Alpha Conde, a comprehensive initiative have been done with Guinea, and supply of the market have been multiplied by 5 when national subsidy dedicated for fertilizer have been reduced by 60%. Same example in Nigeria, when under fertilizer presidential initiative under President Buhari, OCP Africa partnered with FEPSAN and the local government to give access to the farmer. So we have tremendous example through Africa. We have just to make sure we will scale up at the right level and bring all the stakeholders around the table.
Thank you very much. I think those numbers are quite impressive. Thank you. Now, you can build on this impressive agriculture transformation. We've heard about the Njere mix, and you're going to tell us how we got from A to B and the transformation of the fertilizer plant. So Mr. Khalid Bomba is the Chief Executive of Ethiopian Agriculture Transformation Agency. Over to you.
Thank you. Maybe from my side, I'd like to just give a sense of how we in Ethiopia have been thinking about the transformation process, because as Dr. Amoako had mentioned, in Ethiopia, when we think about this process, it's not just about growth, it is about transformation, a structural transformation. And it has two prongs to it. The first is to look at the structural issues facing the agricultural sector and then identifying solutions for these structural issues. And as my colleague Faisal mentioned, one of those areas is fertilizer. But it's not limited to fertilizer. We also looked at issues related to seed, irrigation, research, extension. And in each of these different areas, we identified what are the key systemic bottlenecks and then interventions to address them. And in total, these constitute what we call the transformation agenda. So the one in fertilizer that Faisal mentioned, Ethiosis, was a digital soil mapping of the entire country's fertilizer going district by district. So nearly 800 different waredas or districts were, we sent teams down to collect soil. So we have over 100,000 soil samples that were collected, bagged, tagged, and then analyzed using wet chemistry as well as spectrophotometers. And then district by district, we have fertilizer recommendations from farmers. And what encouraged us was not only the development of these fertilizer recommendations, but to engage in a partnership with OCP to make those fertilizer recommendations into a reality by not importing the fertilizers, but now actually developing a fertilizer factory here in Ethiopia to satisfy that demand. Another interesting example is one in the irrigation area. Ethiopia, similar to a number of African countries, is actually blessed with a huge amount of water resources, but we never tap into them. And those water resources is not just soil water, surface water, but we also realized using remote sensing and satellite technology that we actually had a lot of underground water. And realized that it was about 200,000 square kilometers worth of underground water that might be available. So we've been going through a very detailed process to analyze that and then figure out what is the recharge rate. As Jonathan Julius earlier mentioned, we don't want to be in a situation similar to India where we deplete our water resources. So now these maps that we're generating for underground, shallow groundwater is not just where the water is, but what is the recharge rate so that we know exactly how much we can extract per year. And then going from that, we've actually created well drilling teams, youth that we bring together in small businesses to actually extract the water. And then identifying what kinds of pumps are necessary. So thinking about climate smart agriculture again, getting away from diesel pumps to looking at solar powered pumps. And how do we bring them in? And then thinking about what does the spare parts and maintenance look like? And then training car mechanics to be able to maintain these solar power pumps that farmers would be using, and then finally working with farmers to identify what kinds of high value crops could they produce in each agroecology. So these are the types of examples, and maybe let me mention one more because it actually is quite astounding how quickly it's grown, is our 8028 Farmer Hotline, which is a mobile phone service that we provide to farmers toll-free where they call in. We did in partnership with Ethio Telecom. In 4 different languages, farmers across Ethiopia can call in to get agricultural advisory services. Using a touch-tone phone, they can touch 1 for soil, 2 for irrigation, so on and so forth. And in 3 years, we've had nearly 2.5 million farmers registered and over 30 million calls in 3 years. So in 3 years, this has grown from an idea on paper to the largest hotline on the continent. So what we've shown is that there is demand for information. It's just a matter of making sure that you give farmers access to it and then make it useful information and they will actually use it. So this is one part of what we've done in Ethiopia is the structural issues in the transformation agenda. But the second part is integrating these structural solutions in key agricultural geographies and commodities. And this is what we call our agricultural commercialization cluster initiative. Very similar to what was mentioned by Julius when it comes to linking the market agro-processing side with the production side. Also, our colleague from FAO mentioned the intensification. So we actually work with farmers to produce specific commodities that are best suited for their agroecologies. We have the digital soil maps that we've created so we know what kind of fertilizers they need. We work with the Ethiopian Research Institute to produce the high yielding varieties and then work with the seed producers to actually multiply those high producing varieties of seed and integrate them on the ground so that they can produce for the ultimate markets. And in this way, we try to shift the farmers from subsistence-based production to commercial-based production, linking them and creating the demand and the pull from the market side. So it's not a matter of farmers producing and then looking for a market. It's the market saying, I'm looking for this type of commodity in this volume, in this quality. So we've done that quite well, for example, in the beer industry, where Heineken and Abesha and others were looking for malt barley in Ethiopia, but they were actually bringing it from outside the country. So we work with the local farmers here to produce the quality they needed. And again, in 3 years, we were able to substitute all of the raw barley coming into the country for beer production directly to be produced by Ethiopia's local farmers. And the bottleneck now is the processing capacity, it's the malting capacity. So the only raw material that comes in for the beer industry is malted barley because there is insufficient capacity to malt. And now that international malters have realized that Ethiopia's farmers can actually produce high-quality malt barley, we've entered into agreements with Brut Malt and Soufflé, two of the 3 largest malters in the world, who have committed to build beer malting factories here in Ethiopia because they realize that Ethiopia's farmers can actually produce international quality barley. So ultimately, it's this kind of link that we create and transform the sector so that it's no longer about subsistence farming and more about market orientation.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think there's clearly a lot to learn from the Ethiopian experience and how you're linking those markets and where the CFTA, I think all these discussions are showing more and more the importance of open borders. And because if we get now a malt producing factory in Ethiopia, we would like that malt to be able to go to Kenya. And I'm sure that Minister Ofori Atta is thinking, okay, I'm going to malt in Ghana. I need to find out where we should do the soil mapping. And maybe this is something that we should do as the African Union, is get a map of what are the countries that have already done this soil mapping technology and have a very focused effort on improving and increasing the number of soil mapping technology so that we can begin to divert the processes in the right way. So I think something concrete that can come out of here for all of us, but for the African Union in particular, since you're here, and for the Minister, is a recommendation that, rather than saying that we have 15% of our budgets in agriculture, let's say every country should map its soil technology. It's probably cheaper, and the minute you map it, the private sector will come and do the rest. So I think that may be something that we can follow up with and see how we can do it. Thank you so much. I think this has been exciting and very interesting. Let's open it up to the floor. We have maybe 30 minutes for questions, and then we will wrap up. So you can ask questions to any of the presenters. We'll take all the questions, and then I'll go around to ask the presenters to answer and close as in the guise of response. Thank you. Just put up your flags. Oh, you don't have flags. Okay, so you put up your hands. I need help with taking. Okay.
My name is Wanjohi Kabukuru. I'm a journalist with New Africa. My question has been raised because of 2 issues that came up. One, when he mentioned about mobile farming in Kenya and the mobile farmers in Ethiopia. And here comes one of the best kept secrets of ECA. It's something that probably you've decided to keep quiet about it, but it's a good secret. Between around mid-90s up to the year 2005 to 2010, you triggered a process called African Information Society Initiative. And that's the reason we actually have funds and we can communicate now very easily. Through this process, you managed to transform Africa's mobile phone usage, technology, and that kind of thing. Now, joining that with what they've spoken about mobile farming, how can you revive science and technology to manage to leverage in the agricultural sector and build on the transformation agenda that you're pushing? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is Damus. By any means, somebody was telling me Ethiopian officials were invited and they are not here. So in their absence, he was telling me to say something. I'm not saying on that context. The first place, Khalid is there, I'm sure, and many others. I'm going to first thank ASET still keeping us on this issue of transformation, economic transformation, particularly agricultural transformation. Here at ISE, my colleagues Midhat and Adama, 5 years back, there was an ISE commissioned study, which I was also involved from the Ethiopia side, particularly to see, and I think it says rethinking agricultural transformation in Africa. And work was done, and we have lengthy presentations and discussions. I'm going to put one of the recommendations we made then and where we are, because it still matters today. For Africa to transform, it has to practice, each and every state or country has to practice what we call then indigenous policy making. So maybe this is a question not necessarily for ASET, but to see where the state is. I will add to that indigenous policy and strategy making what David, you said, inclusiveness. If we put those two together, I think we can make a big jump forward. The other issue is, I read quickly the review. In Ethiopia, we have now a serious debate about this issue of economic transformation and agricultural transformation. I have made contributions, particularly recently, I published 2 books. And those from Ethiopia side and some know about those books. Particularly in my last book, which was just published and launched 9 months ago, I used this issue of intra-agricultural transformation, which we have not still made it. And because of that, we are not making a big move in Ethiopia's, agriculture as well as overall economy. It's because it requires change in farm structures, farm size change. The debate is that we should not stick to the debate of small versus large, but how to transform our agriculture to modern and commercial through making our smallholder agriculture jumping step by step. Okay, so I think this issue, maybe I need further explanation. I like the presentation to bring in this the use. We have already existing smallholder farmers, but the use can be organized to jump on and do some medium, type of farming. So how further? The last one is the issue which I raised in my recent book, and which I am sure must be in most African countries. We are talking about small private farmers, but the question of private farmers has been debated in this country, whether we have private small farmers or not. But we have resolved that debate. Farmers, naturally, they are private, we have agreed. But the question has become, do we have in Ethiopia real private farmers or nominal private farmers? We are saying, if we are not changing our extension and other strategies, if we are not changing our transformation agenda to create real private farmers as a base farm management theory tells us a farmer who makes a decision where to buy the inputs, what to produce, where to sell it. Okay? It doesn't matter. The farmer has to decide where to buy the inputs, where to sell it, how to sell it, you know, all these things. So I think this issue of creating real private farmers, small farmers in Africa, should be in the front agenda of transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's nobody on the side. I'll go down. Maybe well, you put your hand up, so I'll take the other two and come to you. Okay.
Bon, je m'appelle Jean-Claude, je travaille avec la mutuelle panafricaine des risques. J'ai une petite question à l'honorable ministre des Finances et du Ghana. Le Ghana, oui, moi je disais que le Ghana, la Côte d'Ivoire, le Nigeria.
Wait, let's make sure that the translation works. I'm not sure it's working. It is. What channel?
Channel 1.
Channel 1 is English. French. French to English. Third, channel 3. Okay. Vous pouvez continuer.
Ok, moi je disais que le Ghana, la Côte d'Ivoire, le Nigeria, le Cameroun, ils sont parmi les grands producteurs du cacao. La récente chute des prix du cacao sur le marché mondial nous a montré que la loi de l'offre et de la demande n'est pas la seule à réguler les prix. Il y a beaucoup plus de produits financiers, de plus en plus, qui s'intéressent aux commodités agricoles. Et ces produits sont beaucoup plus complexes. Et ma question est celle-ci. Est-ce que ces pays producteurs sont-ils suffisamment équipés pour essayer de travailler dans la façon de stabiliser donc les prix? Bon voilà, je vais me limiter à cela.
Merci beaucoup. Question très intéressante.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Afekana Jerome from Nigeria, but I'm not a weed killer. Why not taking away anything from asset, since their report is always very comprehensive and rigorous? By the way, it's so nice to see Dr. Kewa Amakweke. Is it possible to envisage an agri sector in Africa that will be trim and fit around 5% of GDP and fulfill these developmental roles? Why I'm asking this question is structural transformation is usually the process of labor moving away from agriculture towards under high productivity sectors. At least if you follow the work of McClellan and Roderick and several others in recent times, labor is beginning to move away from agriculture. But they are moving straight to services which are of low quality. There's nothing added. At least the data is buttressed by at least 43 countries. We are making the atypical transformation away, bypassing manufacturing. So what do we do? That is a puzzle that I'll be trying to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, yes. And our colleague who has worked on some of the work that we're working on is asking us to give a status report almost. We've done some work within ECA, collecting some knowledge. What have we done? No, it's not a status report. But what I wanted to touch on is I love the idea of the youth as the middle, as the scale, because we are looking at how to involve youth in agriculture. And then there was a question on how do we transition from smallholders to middle and then to large, for those who are small. And we can't hide from the issue of land. Sometimes we say it's a little bit too emotive to talk about. But we must look at overlaying that soil data over the issue of land rights. Because if we don't do that, if we don't collect the issue of the claims that are there on the land and how we can then look at where the land is that we can grow into, then we are going to have a little bit of a problem. And the issue of investments and large-scale investments then comes in, because we have countries that actually do have land that we can provide for that. And the African Union has guiding principles on how we can move, and some of the assessments that we must do in terms of analytical work to look at not just the biophysical side, but also to look at how we can then overlay that over what we need to do in terms of looking at the assessments that we need to do in order for us to say where is the land and for what that we need to put it in terms of enterprises and in terms of business. The issue of getting women and youth then would come into play in terms of getting women looking at land banks. I think it has happened in some countries, including Ghana, how we involve women and youth more in this debate. So just looking forward to continuing to work with ASET and others as we look at some of these solutions.
Thank you. As you all know, the ECA has a land policy center where we're doing a lot of this work, and maybe this soil mapping work can be done jointly with the center. Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up. Maybe I'll just, there were not many questions actually, but so let me just go back to the panel and ask for one wrap-ups, because I think the minister and myself have to dash out quickly, but I'll start with you, Faisal, please.
We should develop more public-private partnership on regional and country level in order to be sure this transformation agenda we are dreaming about is really implemented.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Partnerships. Mr. Firi?
I think the role of science in agriculture remains critical, and I think one question I just asked on the mobile phones, you can do a lot with mobile phones. It is not just for extension services. It's right now we have harnessed the use of mobile phones for also the other way around, for the farmers reporting on animal diseases, on crop pests like fall armyworm in Africa. We even have an app for nutrition data, and so on. So there's a lot you can do, but I think to the extent that there is still corruption even in the agricultural sector, and this is a topic that we have been discussing yesterday, we will not get the potential that we need.
Thank you for reminding us about the corruption part and the subsidies, Mr. Minister. That's the big fight that we have around agriculture, is subsidies and corruption, and how we take that away, which actually prevents the private sector from coming in. So corruption, partnerships, good partnerships then, not corrupt partnerships. So I'll start with you then, Rahel, to close on the side. 1 minute.
Sure. Everything has been said here, but is Africa. We have the resource. We have everything in Africa if we use it properly. And I think Africa should be the one to supply the rest of the world.
Africa can feed itself and supply the world. Mr. Okran?
Yeah, my humble opinion is encapsulated in 3 words: implementation, implementation, implementation. We need to do a lot more about implementing some of the wonderful things that we come up with. And I'm saying this because at the first ever Africa Transformation Scorecard, Agricultural Transformation Scorecard, which was launched at the AUC in this January, this report scorecard sought to measure how member states are implementing the Malabo commitment. And it revealed, the report showed that out of 47 countries which presented data, only 20 of them are on track to, sort of achieving the Malabo commitment. So we need to put more emphasis on implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Khalid?
Yeah. So let me just briefly talk to a specific issue related to land rights and consolidation, because I think it is really quite important. But I think we need to be very careful not to fall into a trap of considering smallholder farmers as automatically inefficient, as automatically producing at less productivity levels than commercial farmers, because there are significant volume we produce. There are advantages for, should not be lost. And even when it comes to the consolidation process, to be for an African into the trap of not and working for them, because that might not be the right solution. There are communal ways of doing it, and here in Ethiopia, over the 2 years, we've been incredibly impressed by farmers getting into production groups and producing almost one commercial farm where they plant at the same time, plant the same varieties, weed at the same time, use mechanization, but ultimately own small parcels or have land rights to it. So there are ways of consolidating without jumping to one model that has been successful in other countries. We should solve it with our own types of solutions.
So smallholders and large holders can both be productive. We just need to figure it out. Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question about the cocoa industry. What we've done is that the two presidents, for the first time, are now talking about cocoa. And so there's a sort of high-level committee looking at how Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana can begin to look at value processing to support that, and also the issue of a commodities exchange. And I think you would then begin to control the prices, a lot better. And once you get into that, you also have the question of whether you should have equity stakes in the Cadburys and all of that, so that you sit at the board and also begin to then dictate how the prices will go. So we've had some good conversation with some of these multilaterals, multinationals, and then we are moving toward that. I think we just need to change the equation. That's all. And the new sort of leadership is having the capacity to do that now. I think I'm sure in the next 5 years, the issue of oscillating cocoa prices may be a thing of the past.
And I give you the last word. Thank you again for the report and for the stimulating debate, Dr. Amwako.
Thanks very much for all the good comments, the wonderful discussions, the insights you've all provided. Now, this report, one of the things we said, that we see as a policy playbook for policymakers, practitioners, and others to transform Africa's agriculture. And the discussion, some of the takeaways clearly indicate there's a lot going on within the continent in various places that we can learn from each other and build upon it. And at ASSET, we have processes just to do that. We have this Pan-African Coalition for Transformation, where we've taken about 8 areas, one of which is agriculture. And in the case of agriculture, drawn from this report, we are working with AGRA, and we've selected about 10 countries, starting in Ghana, where we're going to do country-specific analysis on some of these issues to bring policymakers and other stakeholders in the countries together to take on these issues. So this is a huge report. So for Ghana, we picked 4 areas where we are doing in-depth analysis. One is land, which is important, the commercialization, the youth, and markets, transborder. So we're working on AGRA. We're doing Ghana-specific studies, and later this month, we're doing a platform with the Ministry of Agriculture, where we're bringing all the stakeholders to take the Ghana analysis based upon this report and say, how does this interface with Ghana's government's own policies moving forward? And it's a similar process that we hope to undertake working with AGRA in other African countries. In June 20th and 21st, we're having this African Transformation Forum, and we're going to bring these countries together to learn from the Ghana example of the analysis and to say, how do these other countries, and peer-to-peer learning. I heard Khalid, some of the things happening in Ethiopia are so exciting. that other countries just have to know more and learn from that. And these are some of the areas where we hope that ASSET working with other institutions, and that's where we look forward to a re-enhanced partnership with the ECA in some of these areas, and the EU, obviously, because the Continental Free Trade, the theme of your conference, agriculture is important. Open up markets and all these issues. So everything we say has to fit in that environment. So working together, we can accomplish a lot, as we say. And how do we have mechanisms on this continent to just do that? And if we do that, then the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. So that's all I want to, and thank you, Vera, and thank all of you for giving us this opportunity, for making this presentation. And Julius and Dede, thanks for all the arrangements you've made to make it all happen to you. And Ken, thanks for joining us. I didn't know you were coming to this presentation, so it was an extra bonus. And as I say, Vera, thanks very much for your kindness, and for all my good friends at ECA. Thank you very much once again.
Just need to go and plant. Thank you. For food and jobs, I'm told. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.